Welcome to this video podcast provided by Nelson Mullins Private Wealth Services Group. This is an installment in our estate planning and probate litigation blog, which provides regular insights into important issues to people seeking to pass wealth at their death, and to people who are unfortunately involved in a will contest or other form of litigation over trusts and estates. My name is Robert Brunson, and I am a probate litigator at Nelson Mullins in our Charleston, South Carolina office. Joining me today is nationally renowned psychiatrist Bennett Blum in the field of geriatric psychiatry and forensic psychiatry. Dr. Blum is board certified as a psychiatrist, and he has extensive experience with issues surrounding undue influence and mental capacity in the elderly. Dr. Blum, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to join you and to be here.
I wonder if you could explain to our audience the recent studies that that give us more insights into how Alzheimer's affects the brain, and in turn how that might manifest itself in terms of behaviors.
Okay. Well, just this year, there was a study that came out. Actually, it came out in April, so this is very recent material. Researchers from major institutions around the globe joined together, and they were looking at the brains of people who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. It had been long thought that the word or the term Alzheimer's disease did not refer to just one single disorder, but rather to a bunch of disorders that all ended up looking very similar to each other. In this study that was done, the researchers looked at brain scans from nearly 1,700 people, and they identified 4 subtypes. So first is the type where this abnormal protein spreads mainly in the area of the brain that affects memory. This is the classic presentation of Alzheimer's disease. You know, someone who loses the ability to reliably recall facts that happened just a short time ago. That's variant number 1, and that occurred in about 1/3 of the cases. Variant number 2 doesn't affect primarily the memory centers first, but it affects basically the rest of the brain first. But in this second variant, the executive functions, the ability to think in a linear, logical manner, and to consider likely outcomes and consequences, those abilities were impaired first, and even though memory per se was intact, would stay intact. This occurred in about 18% of all of the cases. The third variant began and was focused primarily in the visual cortex. This occurred in about 30% of the cases, and the way it manifests is that those poor individuals gradually lose the ability to recognize familiar people or places. So they have trouble orienting themselves. They start developing problems distinguishing shapes, contours, distance, movement, and eventually will progress where they may not recognize that they're, say, in their own house, or they may not recognize people who were familiar to them. The last variant starts more sort of behind the ear. That's where your language centers are. And those people tend to develop problems with language. They have problems remembering words. They have word trouble, word finding difficulty, or they have difficulty understanding what's being said to them. So words lose their meaning. And this occurred in about 19 to 20% of the cases. So those are the 4 major subtypes.
So of these 4 types of Alzheimer's disease, given your experience and expertise in the field of undue influence and mental capacity, which of the 4 types, give you the greatest concern about rendering a person potentially vulnerable to being unduly influenced by others?
I would say the second subtype, what they're calling variant number 2. Variant number 2 is the one in which people first or more quickly lose the ability to consider likely options and outcomes of their decisions. When that ability gets compromised, then it's easier for people to be defrauded, or to be conned, or to be manipulated. And while at the same time, it makes it increasingly difficult for them to understand any sort of legal documents, anything related to issues relating to financial planning of any sort. And if it gets bad enough, there'll be difficulties understanding and making reasoned decisions about their own health care.
From the standpoint of being vulnerable to undue influence, you don't really need to know exactly what is causing the behaviors that are of concern. Is that fair?
Oh, that's absolutely right. It doesn't really matter if a person is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, or say multi-infarct dementia, or disease X, whatever a new disease is. What matters is their actual ability and what limitations are placed on them. Any type of cognitive decline, even if it's mild, raises a person's vulnerability to being manipulated and therefore to being unduly influenced. For undue influence, what you're talking about is not so much what that person is able to do or not able to do. What you're talking about is, to what extent did someone else manipulate that person into doing something? And so then you're talking about vulnerability to manipulation by others. And people can be vulnerable to undue influence for lots of reasons.
Thank you, Dr. Blum. That's going to conclude today's installment and our look at Alzheimer's disease and how that might affect considerations of people who are under undue influence or who may be executing testamentary documents. We hope everyone will join us for our next installment next month, when Dr. Blum will be talking about what to do in a situation where a family member or even you are experiencing some signs of dementia, and you want to ensure that the will or the trust that is in place to pass the family wealth is protected from a possible future claim of undue influence. Thank you, Dr. Blum.
Thank you.